Hello, this is Christy Rubenstein from Diana T. Myers & Associates, and welcome to this video which will provide you with a step-by-step guide on using the ODFC Project Monitoring Tool. If you need to become more familiar with the basics of this tool, consider watching our other video which offers a quick guide to the tool and the workbook. To get ready, I've already got the Project Monitoring Tool and the APR files I will be using open. The APR I am using is an Excel format, as you can see. But you might also be using a PDF version, that's fine too. My APR is a report run on all projects, but yours should not be. As a result of this being run on all projects, the numbers I'm going to be inputting are much larger than anything that you would probably be looking at. I just want to note that I have 3 files, which is pretty typical of those of you who are using Excel versions. So I've got a data quality report, I've got the main section of the APR, and I've also got question 23. These are all separate files for me, and I'll be toggling back and forth among them as we work through the workbook. Again, I'll note that we do not need the subpopulation files. You might also be tempted to download those. You really don't need those for this report. Now I've got an older APR, which you'll see my date run does not match with the date run that we're looking at for this version of the quarterly monitoring report. It's fine for this demonstration purpose, but if you are doing this, it should match. Also be aware that your organization should be the correct organization, and the program should be the project that you're looking to report out on. If you have a consolidated project, just be aware that you may need to run the APR and select all the individual projects that make up the consolidated project. It really depends on the time frame of the report being asked for, and also when those individual projects ended and whether they are included in the consolidation or not. Now I'm going to navigate to the Project Monitoring Evaluation Tool. I'm working here in version 5.0. You might be working in a later version, that's fine. The basics of this should stay the same, so don't worry too much about that. And one of the things to note when you get into this the tool, is that it is primarily locked. Most of the cells are locked. The only things that you're going to be able to click on and enter information into are these yellow highlighted cells. Everything else is locked. You're not going to be able to click on that. That's perfectly normal. You will also see that we have this grayed out area. That area is not going to print when you go to print. You should be able to print all of these in a letter size paper format. That should be all set up for you. But the gray areas won't print. The gray areas here really provide instructions and notes. We also have notes and tips along the side as we have had folks do this. We've seen maybe that they get tripped up on very specific things, and so we've added some clarifications and tips and notes where needed. Do be sure to read through the instructions and the notes just to make sure that you are, again, running the APR for the correct time period, that there have been no changes to the APR, so just make note of that and make sure that nothing really has changed. Okay, so we're really going to start, one of the things I'm going to do when I start off is make sure that I save a version of this. And now I have my version saved and I'm going to start working. So when we start off, we're going to put information into the general information section. I just want to scroll down quickly to show you the performance report that is at the bottom of the tool. Now the performance report, before you enter in information up in the general information section or the data entry portion, is going to mostly be TBDs. And then we'll have some blanks. And that's the way it should be before you enter in anything. As you start to enter in information, these are going to switch. And some of that information is really coming from the general information section, so please don't skip this. It is important. Now we have some drop-down menus, and if your grantee name or project name is not listed, you can always select the other option, but we would ask that you, again, follow up to make sure that you're letting us know that what should have been listed there was not listed. Now we get to project type, I just want to point out that you're going to see that that's going to trigger some changes in the performance report. We have selected permanent supportive housing as the project type here, and as a result we're going to see that the criteria that are really pertaining only to rapid and transitional become NAs. So just make a note of that, that information is automatically going to trigger changes in the performance report. The other thing that I'll make a note of here is that the number of units in the project should not be the number of units that are served, the number of households served over the course of the year. It should really be the number of units that you have occupied at any given point in time. So just be aware of that. Again, you do need to input information on entries and exits. I'm going to note here, I'm going to put in a 0 for exits. I'll change that, but I wanted to show that when you enter in a 0, which is actually very likely for many permanent supportive housing projects, particularly small ones, that you have no exits, it is going to trigger a note in your performance report that you had no exits. So there are certain criteria which can only really be measured if you do have people exiting, so we need to make sure that that is noted. And it will say no exits there. So when we go up, again, I'm going to fill this in with a number, and I'm going to continue to fill in the information in this section. And it's important because we want to know who's filling in the report. We do have some agencies that are subrecipients, and so you can fill in that information as well. It's helpful for us to know. Okay, and then once all that is filled in, we're ready to really get into the data input portions of the report. So a lot of this is going to be very dry. You're just going to be looking at data tables from your APR and adding in that information. The biggest thing that people mess up on is they're pulling information from the wrong columns or rows. Another issue that people have is they just make a typo, but don't go back to check it or fix it. So we do suggest that you check in on your data, make sure that you've entered in the correct information. It's really important to be looking at the data at the end in the performance report, because if it doesn't make sense, it may be because there was a data entry issue. So go back and check that first. It's pretty common for people to just type in the wrong number in a box somewhere. So there is a note here on question 4 about the percentages, and you can see that that's the full note, but I'll explain basically what it is, which is that if you have a number like this, which is 0.54 over here, if you just type in 0.54, it's going to turn it into 54. So you really need to have the 0 in front in order for that to show up properly. And that's what that note is about. Again, that's just a quirk of Excel, and we've added a note to make sure that it's a little more clear what you need to do. So whenever we have those kinds of issues, we just try to make a note. Anything that we think people are going to get tripped up on, we try to have a tip or a note in that grayed out area to make it a little more clear what needs to happen. Okay, so now I'm done with my data quality report, APR report, and now I can move over to the main APR and start pulling in data from there. Now again, one of the things that you're going to notice is that we're not asking for data on every column or row, and so you're going to have to pay attention to the data points that we are asking for and make sure that you're collecting the correct information. And some of these tables are quite large, We often only need the total column or the stayers and leavers column. We'll get there to see some of those examples. Age is another good example of one where we're skipping around. We're not asking for every row of data. We're only asking for very specific ones. So again, you need to make sure that you're reading in the tool the rows that we need data for and pulling that information as appropriate. We're trying not to ask for more information than we need, and so we're trying to be sort of limited. That does, however, mean that we might jump around, and it might be a little confusing for you at times. Now, the other thing you can do is if you're not quite sure what data you're supposed to be pulling is you can go to this tab which says Resource Only APR Table Examples, and you can scroll through and see like, oh, am I pulling the right data for age? Okay, yes, I get it. They only want these. Okay, so then this is really meant to be a resource to help you make sure that you're pulling the data that we're asking for. So we'll keep scrolling down and entering in data. The other thing is that some of the tables in the APR have these names like, okay, there's question 13A1, but we're asking for 13A2. So just make sure that you're, again, in the right table, because the table numbers can have these very similar names, but it's just not quite the one that we need. So don't get confused by that if you are new to the APR and to these tables. So again, we're going to just really be adding in a lot of information here straight down for some of these tables. Others, like I said, will jump around, but these, for example, are pretty straightforward. And you can really start to just kind of plow through your data entry. Again, you might start to quickly work through your data entry. It might be more prone to making errors if you do that, so just double check your data, make sure that you have input the right number, you didn't make a typo, even if it's something that's really straightforward like this one. Now we get to one like question 15, where we're only asking for very specific tables. Again, you're going to have to look. Place not meant for human for habitation is what we're looking for. Skipping all of these others, right? So we're just looking for this one number. And then we're jumping down to the bottom. So making sure that we are pulling the right data points. And again, the cash income one, this is another example where we're jumping over to look at the stayers and leavers column. I'll just note that we really don't look at the at start column for many of these tables, if any. We're really focused on stayers, leavers, and totals for the most part. So just be aware of that. And again, we're jumping down here. We're not looking for the data for these individual income ranges. We're actually care a bit more about our aggregated data in this case. So that's what we're looking to capture from this. Now, if you had no leavers, that's fine, but just be aware that you really do still need to put in the zeros. It's really helpful for us because then we can make sure that it wasn't just left blank. It's important to just go ahead and fill that in with a 0. Okay, so this one we skip the adults with missing information and jump down, so I just want to note that because that can be a little confusing. And again, we're just asking you to pull the information that we really need, trying not to gather a lot of extraneous information, but it does mean that you'll have to, pay attention and make sure you're matching up what we're asking for. Now I want to stop for a minute on question 19A3. 19A3 does trip people up. For the most part, that's because we've transposed the data, the columns and the rows in order to fit into the tools format but that does mean that you have to be a little more careful. Our number of adults with earned income matches here, over here, and then other income is going to be a column, not a row. Any income, again, a column, not a row. And we're jumping across these. We're not asking for all the information for all of what are all the columns in the APR table. We're not asking for all of that. We are jumping and only asking for some of them. So just really carefully read through what is being asked. In this case, we're going to input our data. We're going to work our way down. And then, so I've entered the 1, the 15, the 29, and I'm going to skip this one that's not asked for, and then jump over to the total adults, which is 407. And then this number, which is adults who gained or increased income, which is 44. And I'm not asking for the percentage. Lots of folks give me the percentage, but that's not the right number. So just be sure you're filling in the right data that is asked for. Now, the total adults will stay the same across all of these in this particular table. What might seem like counterintuitive is that any income is not going to be added up from earned and other income. It doesn't work that way. It's calculated differently, so don't expect those to add up. But do expect that your total should be the same here across all of these. Okay, so we're about to get to the end. I'm going to add in my data here on stayers and leavers, but I'll note that we're getting close to finishing up with this set of data, and we're going to jump into the next APR file that I have, which is for question 23. These are pretty straightforward. I will say that, again, with health insurance, we're not looking for the information on all of these health insurance options. We really just want the information that's aggregated. So be aware of that. Okay, jumping around a bit, really important number for us to have both for the income and for the stayers and leavers is this number of stayers not yet required to have an annual assessment. It's different for the health insurance column often than for the income. Health insurance covers everyone in the project. So if you have minors, children, they're going to be covered, whereas they are not covered in the income. So just be aware of that. And then we're going to scroll our way down. Again, just being aware that not every data point needs to be input. And so just paying attention that the right numbers are asked for and being aware that that's okay. We're only really asking for the data that we need. We often get folks saying like, hey, you didn't ask for this. Are you sure that you don't need that? And the answer is usually yes. We're only asking you to input the data that we really need. Some of it we do not use for the calculations, but we do use to check in when something doesn't seem to make sense to us for context. Okay, so I'm now done with my main section, and I'm going to jump over to the APR for question 23. This is a very large table, 23A and 23B. They're duplicates of each other, just cover folks exiting after different period of days. So we only need a couple of numbers from here. This one does trip up people often. Just want to be clear. Permanent destinations, subtotal. That's what we're looking for. So I'm going to enter that in and then scroll down and look at the total, and then I'm going to enter in that and then every number underneath. Okay, and then the same thing for 23B. I'm going to enter in the subtotal of the permanent destinations, and then I'm going to go through and enter in the total and then the numbers underneath. And with that, we've completed our data entry. Okay, so now you're going to look and see that you have this performance report. And the performance report is going to be a helpful tool for you to better understand if your agency is meeting benchmarks, not meeting benchmarks, etc. So one of the things you'll notice again is that only the criteria that apply to your project type will be filled in. We're going to go up quickly. I'm going to change this over to, I'm going to pick rapid, and we're going to see that the rapid criteria start to get filled in here instead, and the PSH are NA'd. So with that, we can start to look at, well, how is the project performing? To explain this part of the report, I'll just say that we have, for reference purposes over here, the latest scoring standards, benchmarks and thresholds information. So the upper threshold, lower threshold, and then if you did not meet the threshold, what that number would be. We also have the latest SPM data that only applies to a couple of criteria, but it's worth looking at to see if your project is in that range. So when we look through this, we can see our actual performance, which is calculated. Some of these are really straightforward. This is the number that's input at the top. Some are much more complicated. We're adding a bunch of numbers together, dividing it, subtracting out certain folks whose data shouldn't be included, for example. So we have that, and then we have the conditional formatting, which applies. It's reading this number and then letting you know whether that performance number met the threshold or benchmarks or the SPMs. And so you'll get a green check mark if you exceeded the upper threshold, met or exceeded it. You get the yellow exclamation point if you're in the sort of, you met the lower threshold but you didn't quite get up to the upper threshold. And you get the red X if you did not meet the threshold at all. Now, to better understand how these calculations were done, you can look here at this resource worksheet, which is Renewal Scoring Standards. And just to point out that this is really just a screen grab of the renewal scoring standards from the last NOFA round. We have in the back, starting on page 12 from the last NOFA round, the calculations for the different criteria. So this is the formula used to calculate performance. If you want to better understand what is driving your performance and why something showed up, maybe you thought it was going to be different than it showed up, you can look at this and see if you can recreate that data point yourself. And if you think there is an error, you can get in touch with us as well. We can double check that. But often what you'll find looking through here, if you're finding a number that doesn't match what you think it should match or should be, then I think one of the things you can do is first check to make sure you entered in all the data correctly in the fields up here in the data entry portion. Second, you could start to run reports in CT-HMIS to better understand if particular clients aren't showing up as having, say, health insurance or income or something that you thought everybody had, but you're seeing here a number that's different from what you thought it should be. So that's, you can start to backtrack using the tools in CT-HMIS. You can also start to have conversations with other agency staff who may be also charged with inputting data into HMIS and also carrying out case management activities, seeing if that data has been entered, if those activities have been undertaken, and make sure that there was nothing sort of amiss there. If you suspect that it is a programming error for CT-HMIS, you should submit a ticket to the help desk so that Nutmeg is aware of the issue and can start working on it, and just understand that it takes them time to work through those issues. So be aware that you do need to leave plenty of lead time for that to happen. So with that, again, I will just point out that you can print out your completed report. You can bring that with you and talk to folks about it, talk through the data. One of the other things that we suggest is once you have been doing this sort of detective work and cleaning up data, make sure you do complete another run of your APR data, and that you input all of that data into a fresh version of this monitoring tool to make sure that you're submitting the latest and greatest data on behalf of your agency and the project. Once you've done that and you feel really confident that the data is as sort of updated and correct as it's going to be, that's when you would save this file and then email it to us to the ODFC Gmail account, making sure that you meet the deadline for the quarterly monitoring process. Because again, it's really important to submit your data, even if you think it's not entirely correct. You should be in touch with Pam. You might want to submit the report regardless and then let us know that you're still working on some issues with Nutmeg, for example. So be sure that you're meeting the deadline. Otherwise, you might get dinged with a late submission in the next round of NOFA scoring. So important that you meet those deadlines. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us through the ODFC Gmail account. Feel free to do that. If you're having trouble with the tool, if you're not understanding why certain criteria are sort of calculated the way they're calculated, we're happy to talk through those issues with you. So we hope that this video has been helpful. Thank you for watching. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. In the meantime, good luck and happy project monitoring.